In the third episode of my Occult Symbols podcast, where I talked about the symbolism of the yin-yang symbol, I mentioned how each individual has a shadow side that can both hurt us if we suppress it, or help us if we fully integrate it. One of my subscribers, Carrie, asked me in the comment section of that video to talk more in depth about shadow work, so here it is. The quote says, "We stop chasing for monsters under the bed when we realize they were inside of us. We all have a side to us that we feel ashamed of, that we deny in ourselves, that we suppress and hide deep within our psyche. Just like mold, when traumas, unprocessed emotions, memories, and negative traits sit long enough in the dark, well, they begin to fester." In today's episode, I will be talking about shadow work and an easy and straightforward four-step process that can allow you to shed light, acknowledge, make peace, and even befriend those sides you may not be proud of. Shadow work is nothing new. Cultures and civilizations all had their own way of exploring these human uncharted territories, may it be through seeking the help of a shaman who represented the psychologist or therapist of the tribe, through sacred medicine and altered states of consciousness like ayahuasca or channeled rituals, through meditation practices like Kensho in Zen Buddhism as an example, or through initiation. And that can take multiple forms, being cast in a forest or a mountain for an amount of days, being asked to hunt for the village, and so on and so forth. Shadow work, whenever it takes place, is like the hero's journey, facing obstacles and entering the monster's lair in order to slay it. And that's not always a pleasant trip, but it is always necessary in order to succeed, transform, and reach the desired goal. And this concept of a shadow self actually emerged with Carl Jung's psychological approach, where he describes the shadow as the dark side of the personality, just like there is a day and a night, or a hot and a cold. So now let's dive into the four-step shadow work process. Identify, accept, love, and integrate. The first step in order to properly deal with our shadow side is to identify it. Watch for emotional reactions such as irritation, disgust, anger, fear, sadness. A very quick and fast way to find where our shadow side is hiding, almost like a map, is by noticing what triggers you the most, the things that you judge in others or the things that disgust you. Here's an exercise for you to identify your shadows. Pause the video, take a piece of paper, and write down a list of things that you absolutely hate in others. You could write things as general as cheaters, liars, judgmental people, racists, or as specific as people with ugly feet or people who do not like Game of Thrones. Take your time to truly write everything you can think of. And when you're done, read your list out loud and ask yourself why. Why do I hate this in others for each of the items? So as an example, if you wrote judgmental people, you can add next to it, because I do not like being judged and I think that people who do so are cocky and arrogant. And you can continue doing so and asking these questions of why until you feel like there are no layers to peel. And the answers to the why question are usually traits you do not accept in yourself, but that you still have within you. So if you wrote judgmental people, maybe the shadow part in you responsible for this dislike in others is a part of you that is a little cocky and that is a little judgmental and arrogant, but that you repress so hard because society told you it's bad. You are ashamed of this side, so you do not try to even consider having it in the first place. And if you find it difficult to write your list, I have an extra bonus tip. Looking at your descendants, your 8th and your 12th house in your astrological birth chart. And comment down below, by the way, if you'd be interested in a video that explains how to do your own birth chart and how to shadow work based on that. Also, if you would like a personalized birth chart from me, make sure to DM me on my Instagram account and check my astrology services link down below. Anyways, let's look at an example of a very common shadow self for the purpose of this video. Well, we're gonna name this person John, okay? So John is afraid of intimacy and he has deep-rooted commitment issues. And every time he sees that a girl wants commitment, he vanishes, he disappears, and it just disgusts him. He just starts seeing this girl as weak, needy, and instantly runs away or ghosts her. And the reason behind this is because deep down, he is very codependent. And there's a little boy, little John, who wants to be loved, who wants to be cared for, and who wants to rely on other people. But during his childhood, he got wounded so much because he sought this commitment and intimacy with his parents or caregivers or siblings and didn't receive it. Or he did receive it, but once in this commitment, he got hurt. So after this childhood traumatizing experience, he just unconsciously decided that this part of him that wanted to be intimate, that wanted to be codependent and to rely on others is bad. That this part of John is weak, shameful, and something he just does not want to identify with anymore in his life. And years later, as an adult, every time a girl wants to have the talk with John, talk about the future or mention coupling up, he feels triggered and he runs away. And the funny part is, he will probably attract a lot of really needy women because the universe is always finding ways to help us grow by sending us the people who mirror a level of growth and the same experiences we are not able to resolve. Almost like a test, we need to keep failing until we understand how to pass it. And this is, by the way, a great tip on how to identify your shadows. Also, if there are certain situations or people that you just keep on attracting over and over again without consciously being aware of the reason why that happens, then maybe it's because your shadow self is doing the attraction part for you, especially if what you're attracting is not something that you want. I'm speaking of attracting cheaters or attracting people who are jealous or, certain things of that nature. Before we move to the next steps, there's a distinction that I really need to clarify, and that's the distinction between identifying your shadows and identifying with your shadows. Just like in meditation, visiting your thoughts should not mean identifying with them. You are the visitor, the person sitting in the theater room. You are not the actor, not the movie, not the producer, not the props. The movie does create feelings in us, in you, in every one of us, and that's the beauty of movies. And we tend to identify with the heroes and feel horrified by the villains. But here is a secret. We are neither the hero nor the villain. We are merely visitors, and we should never forget that. Anyways, now that you have identified your shadows, engage in an inner dialogue in order to bring the light into the unconscious. And this is part of the second step of the shadow work process, which is to accept your shadows. And the easiest way to accept something is to understand that accepting does not mean agreeing. It does not mean that you are 100% okay with it. It just means owning responsibility, acknowledging, and validating. It's about being aware. And it takes a while to truly accept our shadows because they're usually built over years and years, even decades or an entire lifetime of suppressing and feeding. When you're first going to see your shadows for the first time, that first encounter, you are not going to recognize yourself, I can tell you that, and you are probably going to feel scared. You are really going to be scared. And this is a warning. What you will uncover after you identify your shadows is going to be hella scary at first. And you will want to reject it, to hide it again under the carpet, to brush it off. But that's the secret. You should not stop there. You should not just let go so easily, because the fact that your shadows are scary, it is a tactic because your shadows, they want to be loved, but they scare you to see if you are really loving of them, or if their disgraceful figure is gonna turn you off and turn you away. It's like a test. It's like looking at an ugly, crooked, and scarred man. He will scare you, and because he is so scary, he probably has the impression that everyone is gonna hate him. So the fact that instead of just being afraid and running away from him, you sit there, think about it, and after you felt afraid, regather your strength and tell him that you do not think he's a monster, and that he is beautiful in his own right, and that you're sorry for feeling afraid of him while he is actually beautiful. You just do not have the eyes to see him. If you tell this to this man, his entire life is going to change. Sometimes some criminals actually change paths just because somebody believes in the good in them. And this is all what shadow work is all about. It's seeing the beauty in what's not beautiful. I know there is a lot of movies that show this. I'm thinking of Despicable Me, the animation movie, which is absolutely cute and funny. But this is what happens when there's a person who thinks he is bad and scary, when all he gets is rejection from others and hate and, shame. This is what he becomes. He becomes even scarier because he lives in that feeling and that frequency. But once you take a look at him and show him that you see something else, then he starts questioning himself.
Cease your staring, creature. Do not look at me.
I'm not afraid of you.
You should be.
And yet, here we are.
The first step, after you took time to befriend your shadows and be comfortable with their ugliness in a way, is to find love within you to bring into them. You have to bring love and compassion to your shadow side. I'm speaking of doing some inner child healing as an example, writing your old self a letter, practicing self-love rituals, pampering yourself, giving yourself a hug, dating yourself, and a lot of other self-love practices. And the final step in the shadow work process is to embody. You can do this by starting to see the value of these shadows and start learning from them and expressing their best quality. To stick with the example of John that we're talking about today, his shadow self is very needy. That's a given. It is not independent whatsoever, and that can be a very negative thing, indeed. But it also has good in it. As an example, this makes him highly sensitive to others. Anyone who is codependent or needy is a very sensitive person. He can cooperate well, which is great. He can know the feelings of others and actually mirror others because he is so sensitive and so intuitive. So he can use this trait to actually stop grinding so much and stop acting tough all the time. He can even attract a woman that can help him make his life easier. So he can rest and let others do things for him like his shadow self actually wants. These positive traits need to be integrated in this step as well as the negative ones. Maybe after accepting that he is needy, he's gonna stop being that way because what we hide actually comes back tenfold. So if you keep on hiding a part of yourself because you do not want to see it, someday it's gonna be so big that it's gonna overshadow everything else within your personality. I want to remind you that shadow work and healing is not a linear process. Just like the onion scene in Shrek, you can't just peel the entire layers at once. You keep on working on yourself over and over again until you get to the core. And the number one mistake that most people make when starting their shadow work practice or their healing journey is that once they do the work and start seeing some forms of results, they rest in their ego and go, oh, now I'm healed, now I'm enlightened, or whatever. While that cannot be further from the truth. There is always more light to reach, and there's always more darkness to uncover. So, have you done shadow work before? What are your thoughts on today's episode? Let me know in the comments section down below and what you think of this, and I'll be seeing you next time. Bye bye.